Hello and welcome to Theology Unleashed, the channel where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. I'm Arjuna, and this is going to be a debate review. A few weeks ago, Purusha and I recorded this debate review. Had a busy couple of weeks and didn't end up posting it, so here it is. Purusha had a debate a few weeks back with TJump on the rationality of theism. Epistemology came up quite a bit in the debate, and Purusha was struggling to understand TJump's position. He's now understood it and wants to give his thoughts.
Yeah, so coming in the debate, I didn't quite know what TJump's epistemology was, and then I sort of learned a little bit of it throughout the debate, and then after watching it, was able to get an even better grasp. And there was one point when I told TJump that his whole epistemology sounds very self-contradictory, and he sort of his claim is that everything is imaginary until proven otherwise. So I asked him, well, isn't your own claim that everything is imaginary until proven otherwise also imaginary? And his reply was something like, yes, that's what it means to be imaginary. So I sort of wanted to go sort of investigate that and interrogate that claim a little bit more. I think we have a clip of it. Maybe that'll be good to show, or should
All right, should we play the clip now?
Yeah.
All right.
99.99999% of all logical possibilities are imaginary. I can imagine unicorns and Klingons and $10 billion in my bank account. Like, I can imagine lots of things. They're all imaginary. Like, the fact that it's logically possible is not evidence it's true at all. It's just evidence it's imaginary. If that's actually literally what it means to be logically possible. It's just something, it doesn't have a logical contradiction in it, therefore you can imagine it. That's what it means. So like a square circle is not logically possible because it entails a contradiction, which means you can't imagine it. So that logically possible just means you can imagine it. Because imaginary.
Right, but you said imaginary doesn't mean false. So why should we think of the claim about unicorns differently than we think about your claim that everything should be taken as imaginary until proven otherwise?
We shouldn't. We should take all claims as imaginary until proven otherwise. And then once we have empirical evidence that something exists outside of our imagination, then it's been proven otherwise. So unicorns is imaginary. We should consider imaginary. Horses are not imaginary, and we can demonstrate it because we have empirical evidence of horses.
I'm just asking how you justify that claim.
The same way I did in my opening. Like, in order to show something isn't imaginary, I have to have an imaginary idea of a theory in my head and say, if it corresponds to reality, then I can predict something about reality that we don't know yet. And if I get it right, that's good evidence that it's something in reality, not just something in my head, because the ideas in my head don't control reality. Like, I can't lift the TV up with my imagination. I can't generate gold bricks on when I will them to exist. It doesn't work. So my imagination doesn't control reality. So if I can predict something about reality that we don't know yet with my imagination, that's good evidence of the thing I'm imagining actually exists in reality, independent of my imagination.
I'm hoping he's going to hop back on, but anyway.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yes.
Did you catch it?
Yeah, the person. I think the last time I heard something about $1 billion and everything.
I just carried on because you hopped off for a minute. I asked him how he demonstrates his claim, and he said that we know his claim we know to be valid because. Sorry, do you want to just say it again? I lost my train of thought. Novel testable predictions. We know something. We know that things are imaginary unless proven otherwise, because we know things that can't produce novel testable predictions are imaginary, and things that do are not imaginary. That's how he backs up his claim that everything should be assumed as imaginary unless proven otherwise.
No, not really. Like, we can imagine infinitely many things. Most of them don't exist. Therefore, everything is imaginary until demonstrated otherwise.
Well, that would just be taking it as self-evident. Well, most of the things you're just saying, things that are logically possible are not necessarily part of reality, because we can imagine so many things that we never experience. But the question is, what about things that we do experience?
Oh, no. So it's like we can imagine things that are logically contradictory. I can imagine that I am older than I am or younger than I am. There's 2 of me, 10 of me. I can imagine that I'm not me. I can imagine lots of things they're all contradictory. They can't all be true at the same time. Therefore, 99% of them are necessarily going to be imaginary just by definition. So, like, I can't be both a man and a woman at the same time. I can't be both 180 pounds and 10,000 pounds at the same time. I can't be on Earth and on Mars at the same time. Like, I can imagine all of these things, but they're contradictory statements. So we know that 99% of everything we imagine is imaginary. We just if you, I mean, if you want to doubt that and think that not everything we imagine is imaginary, I mean, okay, but you just take that one up with the philosophers.
Good bit. Okay, cool.
Yes. So first, let's unpack that. So the sentence "everything is imaginary" is until proven otherwise represents a proposition, and the proposition basically similar to the sentence. So I guess in simpler terms, you can say the truth value of something is false until you can prove it. But if we take TJump's own criteria, then we'd have to assume that it's false until we can prove it. So by that criteria, everything is imaginary until proven otherwise is itself false until we can provide some evidence to substantiate that claim. And that's pretty much impossible to do because there's certain things we just have to take for granted without real evidence or without having a clear-cut, definitive way of distinguishing reality from illusion. So there's a few examples. One is that the famous brain in the vat example. So let's say we're a brain in a vat and we're just being manipulated by some evil scientist to think that we're in a world that is, in all respects, virtually similar to a real world. So when you're talking to me, so let's say we're in this brain in the vat scenario. You're talking to me and other people are talking to me and I see all these other people and it seems like they're real, but they're actually just, I've just been manipulated by the evil scientists to think they're all real. So, scientists or philosophers are fond of talking about these kind of brain in the vat cases. But in TJump's epistemology, it's not clear how novel testable predictions could help you distinguish whether we're in an actual real world where everything I touch is actually real and not just a computer simulation, or in the brain in a vat world. I mean, he himself couldn't find criteria. I don't think there is any criteria by which we can definitively prove that we're in a real world that exists outside of our mind versus being a brain in a vat. I think at one point during the discussion, he mentioned that this consensus of the scientists is that this is a real world, we're not in the Matrix. But if you're in a brain in a vat, those scientists are not credible authorities. They're just creations of the evil scientists, so you can't take them very seriously. So he hasn't really solved the brain in a vat problem by his own epistemology. So it's clear that there's certain things that we just have to accept as self-evident truths, or we have to accept even though we can't prove them. So accepting the existence of the real world is one of those things. So already TJump's criteria is pretty much undermined. But then it doesn't end there either. So his idea is that to distinguish reality from illusion, we have to do novel testable predictions. But in order to do any sort of observation or testable prediction, we have to presuppose that our senses are reliable instruments for acquiring knowledge. But there's no non-circular way of arguing that our senses are reliable forms of knowledge. So if I say, I know my senses are real because I'm touching this table right now. That's circular reasoning. In order for this table to actually exist and for me to perceive it, I have to presuppose that my senses are accurate. Or if my senses are reliable.
Sorry, you froze for a sec.
What was the last thing you heard me say?
You have to presuppose that your senses are reliable. It was only for a second.
Oh, okay, yeah. So if I see a red object and I say, oh, I know my senses are real. See, there's that red object right there. Well, I'm only really seeing that red object if my senses are reliable. So there's no way to prove your senses are reliable, really. You basically have to presuppose it. So, your senses could be reliable, your senses could be not reliable. There's no way to prove one way or the other. You just have to simply accept it on the basis of a lack of evidence that your senses are reliable. So what this demonstrates, we could give more cases too. You can say there's also, there's no way to distinguish whether this world was created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of memories and the appearance of having been created 13.8 billion years ago, or whether, the past really does exist. There's no real way to prove that this world wasn't really created 5 minutes ago. So there's a number of beliefs we have about the world that we have insufficient evidence to demonstrate, but which we accept as true. So on this point alone, TJump's whole epistemology kind of falls apart. And it might have been interesting to see how things would have gone if we had spent more time on this. I think when you establish that it is basically necessary to function as a human being in this world, to accept certain truths about the world that you might not have sufficient evidence for, which you might not be able to provide sufficient evidence for, which there might not be any evidence at all for. Once we establish that it's rational to accept beliefs like that, then I think we can actually establish that it's very rational to accept belief in God.
I think to some extent what philosophy should be doing is figuring out how we actually construct our worldview and articulating it so that we can do a better job of it. And with a lot of these skeptical epistemologies, they don't actually do that. It's like that we don't live our lives with that kind of skepticism. If something is obvious to our senses and the best conclusion we can come to based on our understanding of reality and our experience and intuitions, then we consider ourselves justified in believing it.
Yeah. It's like the type of skepticism that TJump's epistemology brings to the table is just like completely, basically absurd. I don't think any philosophers would really argue on the basis of that. I think it's, rather than demand that everything requires scientific evidence, I think we should acknowledge that there are some things we can't really empirically prove, and use philosophy to see what's the most rational worldview to have. And when you use philosophy to construct the most rational worldview to have, I think you can very persuasively argue that accepting the existence of God leads to a very coherent and plausible worldview.
Well, I think he might argue that himself. So we might, bring up last Thursdayism, which is the philosophical dilemma. I don't think anybody, in fact, actually believes it unless they have a mental disorder, but it's a philosophical conundrum, which is that we can't prove that this world wasn't created last Thursday with the appearance of age. We can't even prove that yesterday exists, because our memories of yesterday could just be implanted in our brain to make us think that it's real. A lot of this kind of skepticism that's brought up in Western philosophy, I don't really think it came up in Eastern philosophy, did it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You do have the idea of Maya, that this world is somehow an illusion, but it's very different. No real tradition really denies that this world has some level of reality. What they would deny is that what we perceive is not how things really are. But the skepticism really doesn't get nearly to that high degree.
I would describe that kind of view of Maya, that this world isn't as it appears, is that our intuitions about this world are valid as long as we don't extrapolate them too far. And when we extrapolate them too far, then we get an idea of this world which is mistaken.
Yeah, and actually, even the most even Advaita Vedanta, which is like the most "this world is an illusion" philosophy, it actually doesn't deny that. It basically describes things in terms of the ultimate reality, in terms of the conventional reality. From the standpoint of conventional reality, like this world exists in one sense, and our senses are not deluding us. Like when I see a pen, I am really seeing a pen. The illusion is that we're seeing this world as separate from God. And we fail to realize that the ultimate reality is God. They'd call Brahman. But even those cases, like, it doesn't deny that we're in a real world. It doesn't deny that our senses have ability to reliably acquire information. So, yeah, and even the Western skeptics, I mean, maybe there are some, but hardly anyone holds to like brain in a vat skepticism.
No, they just
It's just
That's a way of testing an epistemology, right?
yeah.
But where I was going with that is, oh, you've frozen again.
Oh,
Only for a
okay,
second. Where I was going with that is that it seems that in Eastern philosophy and Eastern theologies, the claim is made that certain aspects of reality are phenomenologically unique. So, there is no brain in the vat scenario which could possibly provide the exact same quality of experience which we have from the real world. Like, you have a dream and it's a different quality of experience. You wake up from your dream, it's another quality of experience. When you're intoxicated on drugs and you're not seeing reality clearly, that's a different quality. And if you're familiar with the different things, like sometimes you can be dreaming and you can figure out, oh, I'm dreaming, the clocks don't work properly. Dreams are just weird. You can figure it out because of the quality of the experience. And so like Prabhupada, who founded the Hare Krishna movement in the West, he often made arguments which seems to rest on this assumption that God is phenomenologically unique. So an experience of God or the activities and pastimes of God cannot be replicated by anyone else or anything else. So if you experience that, then you have evidence that God exists, which you have no reason to doubt.
Yeah, I'd say that is a Eastern idea. I think the problem when you bring in extreme skepticism is that like it's sort of like very self-contradictory. Like you're sort of demanding that you have a proof for everything when you that you can distinguish reality from illusion. Um, but by like TJump standard, like you can't distinguish that. You can't solve the problem of skepticism. You can't show that this world is real by his standard. You really have to accept certain things as like self-evident truths, and once you establish that you can and must accept certain truths as self-evident, then the type of skepticism he brought against religious experience, I think, is just unfounded at that point. I think uh, we do have this ability to intuitively see that certain experiences are phenomenologically different, and for TJump to deny this possibility or to demonstrate that you need some sort of demonstrable proof for it, I think it's just not a consistent view to hold because like you can't prove your senses are reliable. So, for example, you can't disprove last Thursdayism. Like it's just sort of like a fact about our human existence that there's certain things we have to accept as self-evident, and religious experiences, I think, can definitely be one of them. Like if you have a experience of God and you intuitively see that it's phenomenologically different than other experiences, um, you should be justified in being able to uh, accept that as such.
Well,
Otherwise, if you have to hold skepticism about that, then you have to hold skepticism about a whole lot of other things, and you just won't have a coherent worldview.
well, that's the other thing is I don't think this question of, regardless of whether, an experience is phenomenologically unique, all that question really establishes is your level of confidence in your worldview. So you should be considered rational to trust your senses because we really don't have any other options. And when I trust my senses and so on, I get a rational worldview. It sort of works. We get science and stuff. So it's a kind of pragmatic epistemology, is what I call it. There's not necessarily any truth value to it. It could all just be an illusion for all we know, but we get practical results from following it. The alternative, I think the debate might be called the debate between fallibilism or infallibilism, whether my epistemic faculties give me fallible conclusions or infallible conclusions. And I think this debate is really irrelevant because it doesn't change the conclusions that you arrive at. All it changes is the level of confidence with which you hold those conclusions. So if you have the skepticism about it, then you get all this worldviews and it's like, well, this could all be false. I could be a brain in a vat, but I've got no other options and I'm getting practical results. Or if you hold the phenomenologically unique worldview, then you're also justified in believing it. It's just you're like you go on, you add to it that I can believe this is true. I've got good reason to believe this is true, or I know this to be true. But the conclusions don't change. The only way the conclusions would change is if you apply your level of skepticism inconsistently. So when you're looking at material things, and your senses, you're like, oh, all of this I trust. And then when you're looking at anything considered metaphysical or spiritual or religious, if you crank up the skepticism dial, you've got an inconsistent worldview. And I think this is one reason we find people like Graham Oppy and other serious philosophers who are atheists, we could say they're philosophers first and atheists second, and they'll admit these points that you're justified in believing what's obvious to your senses.
Yeah, those are very good points. Yeah, it's very subtle, but a lot of these atheists, they'll sort of presuppose experiences as self-evident, or to accept certain things. They won't be consistent when they apply that, and then it's very sort of, I've seen it. It can be very subtle. It's like they sort of claim that they're not applying the same level of skepticism to other claims, but when you really interrogate it, look at things at a deeper level, you'll find that they themselves accept certain things on the basis of no evidence, but then they somehow think it's unreasonable for theists to do the same.
Yeah, well, it's like they sneak the premise in, like Western science gets by because everybody accepts it. And when something is taken as axiomatic, then nobody questions how you arrived at it. But, if you look at the epistemology, then you need to ask, well, how did we arrive at these axioms of Western science that our senses can be trusted, causal uniformity, which is the idea that, a causal pattern which happens today will also happen tomorrow. So if water boils at 100 degrees today, it will boil at 100 degrees tomorrow and the next day and the next day. You can't, I think this was brought up in the debate, you can't prove that using empiricism. All you can prove is every time I've tried it, it's happened, but that doesn't prove that the next time it's going to happen. And one way we can argue for that is, if I flip a coin 99 times and it lands on heads every single time, does that mean it's going to land on heads the next time? The chances of landing on heads the next time are 50%, regardless of whether it's landed on heads 99 times in a row. So experience doesn't get you to absolute knowledge. You need some kind of intuition and logic. TJump doesn't think logic is universal, but that's a bizarre position. Most philosophers think that logic gives us universals.
Yeah, it's very true. Like, there's some things you have to accept as evident. I think maybe to give credit to the atheist side, they might say that, well, everything is fallible, but we should go with whatever is sort of reliably shown to be true. Maybe that's a little bit better line of reasoning, but I think there's still issues with that. You still have to presuppose certain things with that worldview, and I don't know how you can really deny that theism also doesn't give you like reliable. Theism has no way to.
That's the next way I argue. When if it's like, okay, we've got a pragmatic worldview, so whatever gives you good practical results. So we construct our worldview based on not what's true, but what gives us desirable results and takes us away from undesirable results, and that gets us science and dentistry and medicine. You can get all the science out of that, but you can also get religion because, like Dr. Howard Resnick pointed out in his discussion with Matt Dillahunty, that, like in his personal life, he's demonstrated to thousands of people to their satisfaction that this process of Krishna consciousness is practical and true. And he's seen results in his life, and throughout history, billions of people, throughout the ages, have had similar experiences and got nice practical results. And social science tells us that people who are religious are happy, healthy, and live longer than, the average non-religious person.
Yeah, these are all good points. By being a theist, it's not like, you're some crazy like fairy believer or unicorn believer and you're just like dysfunctional in the world and you have to live in your mom's basement or something like that. Like, some of the most very distinguished people in the world are religious in some capacity. There's actually another interesting point about the intersection with science and religion, now that I think about it. The origin of science is arguably traced to Christianity, because with the idea of a all-powerful God who created the universe, you get the idea that that there's a law maker for the natural laws we observe. So with Christianity, when you have the idea that this world is created in an orderly manner and it has laws, then you can actually do science because you need natural laws in order to do science. And at least historically, Christianity has been seen as responsible for science. So even if you're insisting on science as kind of the hallmark of what's reliable or not, you have religion to thank.
Right.
Actually, I think you were mentioning this to me at another point, or Oppie mentioned it, but also if you're like pretty much most people have a sense of religious intuition, and if you're an atheist, what you basically have to do is say that the intuitions that most humans have are wholly unreliable. But then at that point, you've established that your own intuitions, you have reason to seriously doubt your own intuitions. And when you have reason to seriously doubt your own intuitions, you have sort of reason to doubt very great many things. If your senses
Oh,
play,
you're frozen again.
uh,
Okay, but you're back. If you
okay,
have
what
reason to
was the
doubt your
last
senses, you
point?
have reason to doubt a great many things.
Yeah, so if you're doubting theism, then that puts you in a position where you have to doubt a lot of your intuitions and judgments about the world, and that leads to a lot of skepticism, which you can argue is not very rational, and you may be by that same token, if you have skepticism and doubts about something, and you're an atheist, then you have good reason to doubt your atheistic beliefs. Also, you sort of establish that. Actually, the Alvin Planting has popularized the evolutionary argument against naturalism, which is quite interesting. Um, that's the idea that if evolution and naturalism are true, meaning that evolution paired with the idea that there's no God is true, then our intellectual and cognitive capacities didn't develop because they're aimed at tracking truth. They develop because they offer some sort of adaptive benefit, or they basically give us some evolutionary benefit. And they're not truth tracking; they're just mainly there to uh, give us a sort of fitness advantage. So since our cognitive capacities wouldn't even be aimed at tracking the truth, or just what's the most convenient for us to survive, then sort of follows that we have serious reasons to doubt our cognitive abilities, since they're not really aimed at discovering the truth, but just aimed at allowing us to reproduce. Um,
Trying to find that quote from Oppie that I read the other day, but I'm probably not going to find it now. But yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I guess maybe one other point worth adding is like by accepting theism, you have a lot of pragmatic benefits. I mean, many theists are more fulfilled; they're living functional lives. Maybe not all theists, but those that are serious about their faith and aren't just sort of superficial about it, but are trying to imbibe religious values and good moral principles. Um, yeah, basically by being a theist, you get a very plausible worldview. Like there's certain features of the world that are explained very well by a theistic worldview. Um, like philosophers offer the moral argument for God's existence, the idea that we're inclined to think that there are sort of objective moral truths about the world, that it really is wrong to rape or kill or steal. And, if we accept that there are objective moral truths, then, you're sort of left wondering how those objective truths came to be. And under a strictly atheistic, naturalistic account, it's very hard to see how there could just be objective moral truths. Whereas in a theistic worldview, they're objective moral truths because they're grounded by God. So that's one instance where you have, by accepting God, it's not like your worldview becomes totally incoherent or unsensible. You actually are able to make sense of reality. Kind of the same goes for this universe itself. Like scientists acknowledge that it's very, very improbable that we had a universe that could support intelligent life. It's very difficult. It's very improbable, if not, it's very improbable at the least to say that life arose just by sort of chance interactions of chemicals. It's very improbable that we would arrive in the first place, given how many possibilities there were for evolution to go wrong in terms of creating human beings. So it's very rare that we have the circumstances we see today, that there is a finely tuned universe and so on. And under a naturalistic account, it's very hard to explain this, actually. You just sort of have to accept it as chance, but it's a very, very low chance. But under theism, you have a very good explanation. There's an intelligence behind it all.
Yeah, I mean, you get this argument that religious experience is an illusion, or people are deluded, or so on. But one reason that argument doesn't fly is because when people are having some delusion, there's generally some kind of pathology, like people with a drug addiction, they disconnect from reality, and it ruins their lives. That they can't have deep, meaningful interpersonal relationships. They can't hold down a job, or you'd have more mild forms of mental illness where people are misperceiving reality, and they can go on medication which kind of mitigates it and live a somewhat normal life. But anytime somebody's ability to perceive reality is impaired, it generally affects their ability to to function well at a job and to have good interpersonal relationships. Whereas religious people can have as deep, or we could argue deeper, interpersonal relationships than an atheist.
Yeah, it's very true. And yeah, it's all these sort of claims that religious experiences are delusory or some sort of hallucination. I mean, it's just sort of like an unproven hypothesis. I mean, it's maybe one conceivable explanation, but
Yeah, I reckon any kind of skepticism you can level against our intuitions and experiences of God, you can level against any kind of rational worldview using the same type of logic.
yeah.
I've got a clip where he talked about the three blind men in the cup. Why don't we play that?
Oh, okay. I think the person who doesn't meet the conditions and tries to deny that these three other people are having a genuine spiritual experience is just simply not within his epistemic rights to draw that conclusion. Unless you're actually meeting those conditions, experience what they're like, you can't really conclusively deny that they are experiencing something spiritual. You at least have to acknowledge that it's a genuine possibility that they could be experiencing something spiritual, and I simply don't have the epistemic credentials to be able to perceive that thing.
Epistemic warrant, again, comes from having a way to differentiate imagination from reality. Just having a different method that you presuppose works isn't a usable method. So, for example, if we bring a homeopath, a dowser, and a astrologer into a room and say, "We'll find the magical cup or whatever," and one says it's over there, and one says it's over there, and one says it's over there, none of them have an epistemic warrant because there's no way to show that this magic cup exists outside of our imagination. They all have different imaginary methods they think work, but until you can independently verify that their method actually works in reality, like when you mentioned the blind man, people who see the cup, that's not a methodology we use. We use novel testable predictions. If we can show the cup is there, and then the people who could see it are justified in believing it's there because they have a combination of that scientific verification in addition to their personal experience. But if it's just their personal experience, that's nothing. It's essentially just imagination, hasn't been demonstrated to be reality. So if you have an imaginary method that you think gives you a euphoric feeling, that still doesn't give us a way to show this isn't imaginary. You still need some independent method to show this is not an imaginary thing you're feeling. Just like the person who likes the sports teams more than the religious thing is feeling the exact same euphoria towards their sports team that you're feeling towards your God. That seems to be the reasonable conclusion based on all of the evidence. There doesn't seem to be anything special about the Hare Krishna.
That's probably enough. I don't think we drilled him on that much more, but when he says empirically verify the cups there, what does he mean?
Actually, yeah, this was an interesting one thing now that I'm listening to this again that catches my attention is he seems to suggest that scientists only accept as knowledge what they can do a novel testable prediction for. I mean, I think it's scientists also accept certain things on observation. Like they can't empirically test that a star exists. You just have to observe it's there.
That's not this predicting something before the data comes in. Things has always bugged me. Like, let's say with the theory of the Big Bang, it's widely accepted as a valid hypothesis. People go so far as to say it's a fact. But and one of the reasons is because the microwave background radiation was predicted before it was discovered, and the people that discovered it weren't looking for it. They just discovered it, and then some other people were looking for it, and you put them together. But the people that there were people looking for it at the time. They knew we need this to make it prove our theory is true. But what if everybody already knew about the background microwave background radiation before that happened? And then, they're like, oh, here's a theory, and we already know the microwave background radiation is there, so put them together, and bam, we got evidence. Would the theory have still had the same strength that it has today? I don't see how the order that the data comes in makes any difference.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, I think it's quite reasonable to use observations as a basis of acquiring knowledge. So, also, it sort of misrepresents how we come to acquire beliefs about the world. If I see a tree, um, I don't accept that because I've done a novel testable for for sure that tree. I just sort of accept it as such.
Prabhupada gave the example
So
of if you eat a meal, you don't need someone to give you a certificate to tell you that you ate a nourishing, satisfying meal. You just
yeah,
know.
so it's a kind of strange view of reality that the only things we can accept are things we can do not test for prediction. I mean, sure, you could say with the tree, the reason we accept it is because you can do a novel test prediction for the tree.
But what is the novel testable prediction other than more experience? What's a novel testable
Yeah,
prediction for the experience of a tree? I'll go back tomorrow and see the trees there. I'll bring a bunch of people and they'll all see it too. That's just a whole bunch of people all experiencing the tree in various ways at various
yeah,
times. It's just an experience
yeah,
which is the quality of the experience. Craig Reed, who's that Christian that's done a few reviews of some of our debates, he talks about high resolution and low resolution experiences. So if you hear a really quiet voice, it could be indistinguishable from imagination. Sometimes you think your phone's ringing because it's in another room and it's quiet, and you're wondering, am I just imagining that, or is it actually ringing? There's actually a name for that in psychology. But when your phone's ringing loud and it's right in front of you, there's no mistaking it. So when you have a high quality, persistent, and consistent experience of the tree, like Craig Reed talks about, you see something that's there for a whole hour, you don't doubt your sense experience of that tree. You know that tree is there. So, if we can get that with religious experiences, that, every time I go to the temple, I get this experience. Other people who go to the temple get this experience. People that aren't expecting to have this experience go to the temple and have this experience. Of course, with the experience thing,
yeah,
if we're just talking about a euphoric experience, the atheists will say, yeah, you can get that at a rock concert, and we can explain that just using basic psychology. There's no reason to invoke God. But the way I would answer that is to talk about the character transformation. I was hoping you were going to spend more time on this in the debate because, people don't transform their character because of an imagination. Who goes to a rock concert and then, gives up their alcohol addiction and cleans up their life? People go to a church or a temple and have a spiritual experience, and then will turn their life around based on that experience.
yeah. Yeah, I think I mean he had a pretty good point. You could explain that moral transformation in terms of the ideology. But at that point,
You can't.
he's just offering he's just offering speculations at that
No,
point.
I was trying to make this point. Ideology doesn't transform people. If you just take somebody and you're like, here's a bunch of morals that you should believe, and they're like, oh yeah, I should believe this stuff. They don't then go and become some exemplary person who can resist temptations and make the right decision at the right time. That the strength of determination to do the right thing, and their level of disgust and hatred, and what is it, attachment aversion. Their situation with attachment aversion doesn't change just because they accepted an ideology which tells them they should be attached to some things and detached from other things. To actually change your attachments and detachments, you need to have your emotions shifted, and that happens through experiences. Like in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about param drisva nivartate, that we give up a lower thing by experiencing a higher thing. And the word used, drishva, is actually means to see. So when you see something better, it's a very like visceral experience of something higher. Then you lose interest in something lower. Like we gave the stale potato chip which you found in the bottom of your couch. I used that example with somebody once, and they actually said, "I happen to like stale potato chips." But you know, if you've got nothing, you'll enjoy that potato chip. Like when you're fasting, then everything looks good, right? Any kind of food, you know, just like a bowl of rice, you're like, wow, that looks like a really amazing meal. But when you're not fasting, when you actually have a really good meal, and you look at that same stale potato chip, then it's like, yeah, let's throw that in the bin.
Yeah, I think when you sort of view it objectively and you look at the types of people that are doing these that are joining like religious groups and doing these practices, like you can pretty clearly see that they're definitely getting a result from it. I think once you've sort of eliminated the extreme skepticism that TJump's view brings in, then it becomes very clear that you have very good reason to think that your spiritual experiences are in fact genuine. All that sort of, there's so many indications that point towards it. There's very little that suggests that it's illusory.
Yeah. We probably covered the main points. Should we just do like a little summary? Like TJump's epistemology can't justify itself. So if in a debate where we're trying to establish our epistemology, where we've allowed him to bring in an assumption which he can't even use to justify his epistemology, then we're not going to get anywhere unless we show the inconsistency.
Yeah, I think any type of productive debate has to operate on different epistemological parameters. I think there's I'm still in the process of developing or thinking of what some conditions for rationality for theism are, but I think one is that it's theism or belief in God is in the category of beliefs that you can believe without having like a proof per se, like the belief in the real world or belief in other minds. Theism's like that. I would argue that theism is logically consistent. God is not a square circle. God is logically consistent. You get a plausible worldview by accepting theism. You have a reliable way to know God through your experience and through Scripture, and you get practical results from theism. So, it's not like I don't think you could really put something like fairies or Great Pumpkin Monster or Flying Spaghetti Monster through these categories and have it come out rational. So maybe that's a topic for another time. But there's certainly a number of ways in which theism is rational, in which it's certainly much different from other beliefs like voodoo or fairies or something like that.
Yeah, one question I want to ask Graham Oppie, if he thinks that to claim that people are so gullible on such a large scale all across time, and that's the only reason anyone ever accepts religious claims. I want to ask Oppie if he thinks that creates problems for rational worldviews where you want to try to convince people of something rational. Like he points out in his book that if you sorry, a bit distracted having the baby. That if arguments are only useful if there's rational people to convince your arguments, and if people aren't rational, then there's no point in even attempting to give them rational arguments. So if we want to claim that people are so gullible and irrational that they've accepted all this nonsense, then is there any point in trying to convince them of a rational worldview? And why should we assume that we're any different?
Yeah, that's another great point. It's a pretty tall claim to think that most of humans throughout history have just been totally gullible and incapable of discerning the truth, and their intuitions are wholly wrong. It'd be interesting to ask Graham Oppie about that.
All right, should we wrap it up there?
Yeah, I think that's a good wrapping point.
Okay, cool. So thanks for tuning in. This is Theology Unleashed, the place where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. Let us know what you think down in the comments. Maybe you think we misrepresented TJump's epistemology. And be sure to give us a like. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Hare Krishna.